It began with laughter, sharp, echoing across a scorched island somewhere in the Pacific, where the smell of cordite and salt water hung heavy in the air. The Marines, sunburned and half-mad from days without proper rest, stood staring at a shape that looked more like a toy than a weapon of war. "That's it?" someone shouted, pointing at the stub-nosed tank wobbling across the sand. "That's Japan's tank?" Another Marine doubled over, slapping his knee. The entire line of riflemen burst into disbelief. The machine before them was smaller than a truck, its turret barely reaching a man's shoulder, its riveted plates glinting under the merciless sun. To the battle-hardened Marines who had faced artillery, Zero fighters, and night raids, the sight was absurd, almost comic. But beneath the laughter, something darker brewed. Because war had taught them one cruel rule: never underestimate the enemy. The Type 95 Heigo was Japan's answer to speed and simplicity. Designed in the 1930s, it was meant to sprint ahead of infantry, not to slug it out with heavy armor. Weighing barely 7 tons, its thin steel hull was only 12 millimeters thick, just enough to shrug off small arms fire but hopeless against anything larger. Inside its cramped shell sat a crew of 3. A driver crouched low, a gunner peering through a narrow slit, and a commander who also doubled as the loader. Their weapon? A 37mm gun that, on paper, could punch through light vehicles. But in reality, it was like bringing a pocket knife to a gunfight. When U.S. forces first clashed with Heigos on Luzon and later on Guadalcanal, they didn't even bother calling in tank destroyers. A single Browning M250 caliber machine gun could chew through the Heigos' armor as if it were tin foil. Marines quickly learned that one short burst could rip open the engine compartment, ignite the fuel, and turn the little tank into a rolling fireball. Stories spread fast. Marines joked that even angry looks might dent the Heigo. But humor was their shield against fear, and the Pacific was the kind of place where laughter often came just before bloodshed. As one platoon advanced through the jungle near Matanikau River, they spotted movement between palm trees. A metallic glint, a sudden roar, and then clank, clank, clank. A Heigo lumbered forward, its treads sinking into soft mud. The Marines hit the ground, instinct taking over. Corporal Don Miller shouted, "Get the Brownings up!" 2 gunners swung their M2s into position, the heavy barrels glistening. The tank's gun spat a shell that exploded harmlessly against a coconut log. Then the Marines opened fire. The first burst tore across the turret, punching holes clean through both sides. The second burst hit the rear engine plate, and within seconds, black smoke billowed skyward. The tank halted, burning fiercely. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the faint pop of ammunition cooking off inside. Miller stared, wide-eyed. "That's it?" he muttered. "That's their armor?" The others laughed again. But now it was nervous laughter, the kind that hides disbelief. They'd just destroyed a tank with machine gun fire. It defied everything they'd been taught about armored warfare. Back home, the M4 Sherman was the pride of U.S. armor, a 30-ton beast with thick armor and a roaring radial engine. The Heigo looked like a tin can by comparison. Yet in the jungles of the Pacific, the Japanese fought with such tenacity that even their flimsiest machines became deadly in the right hands. The Marines didn't know it yet, but the Heigo had a legacy soaked in early victories. At the start of the war, during campaigns in Malaya and the Philippines, these light tanks had rolled over British and Filipino forces who lacked effective anti-tank weapons. In those early days, the Heigo was a symbol of Japanese speed and coordination, but by the time the Americans faced them, technology and tactics had evolved, and the Heigo was hopelessly outclassed. Its thin armor made it vulnerable not only to 50 cals but even to rifle grenades and bazookas. Still, Japanese crews fought on, often charging headlong into impossible situations. On Tarawa, one Marine recalled watching a Heigo emerge from the jungle at dawn, its gun blazing wildly. "It came right at us," he said later. "Didn't even slow down. We hit it with everything, rifles, grenades, A-50s. It just kept coming until it caught fire and stopped moving." The spectacle was both horrifying and strangely admirable, a testament to the courage, or perhaps the desperation, of its crew. Behind the laughter that accompanied each destroyed tank lay a grim respect. The Marines understood that the men inside those fragile shells were soldiers, not fools. They knew their tanks were obsolete, yet they climbed in anyway, following orders, clinging to the hope that surprise or luck might grant them a victory. In that way, the Hago was more than a machine. It was a symbol of Japan's stubborn will to fight, no matter the odds. That night, as the island quieted under a curtain of rain, Miller couldn't sleep. The image of the burning Hago replayed in his mind, not as a triumph, but as a warning. If the Japanese were willing to send such fragile tanks into battle, what else were they hiding? What new trick? What new machine might be waiting in the next jungle clearing? The laughter of the day gave way to unease, and every Marine knew it. The war was far from over, and the enemy, even when outgunned, was never truly defeated. The rain hammered down like a relentless drummer on steel helmets and muddy helmets alike, soaking through fatigues, turning foxholes into shallow graves of water. The smell of diesel, burnt rubber, and wet jungle mixed into a heavy fog that clung to everything. The Marines crouched under their ponchos, rifles across their knees, listening to the jungle breathe. Somewhere in the darkness, frogs croaked, palm fronds swayed, and now and then came the faint metallic clank of something that didn't belong to the jungle, a tread, a gear, or a hatch shifting in the night. Every man froze at those sounds, because after the day's battle, they knew the enemy's machines could still move out there. Hours earlier, they'd seen what 50 caliber bullets could do to the Hago, how each burst sliced through armor like paper, how the tank turned into a torch in seconds. Yet now that knowledge brought no comfort. Sergeant McAdams leaned over to Miller, whispering, "If they're crazy enough to drive those things again tonight, they'll come right through our line." Miller nodded, his fingers brushing the cool metal of the Browning. It was still damp from the storm, still warm from the day's fight. He thought about the men trapped inside that last tank, the driver who never had a chance to bail, the gunner whose last sight was smoke and flame filling the turret. The Marines had laughed when it happened, but now, in the hush of night, nobody laughed. The war had a way of stripping the humor out of everything. When dawn crept up, gray and sluggish, the landscape revealed its scars. The burned-out Hago still smoldered at the edge of the tree line. Its rivets had popped from the heat, and the barrel drooped like a melted candle. Around it, the sand was blackened, the jungle leaves curled by the blast. Flies hovered thickly. Miller stepped closer, studying the wreck. He could see the outlines of bullet holes stitched across its sides, neat, surgical, almost artistic in their precision. One burst had entered near the vision slit and exited through the opposite wall, leaving a clean tunnel through armor that was supposed to protect men. He turned away, remembering the words of a corporal back at base. "Every tank's a coffin with the lid welded shut." The phrase made more sense now. By midday, new orders came through, reconnaissance to the eastern ridge, where intelligence had spotted more enemy movement. The Marines packed what ammo they had left, the Brownings slung on their shoulders, belts of gleaming cartridges draped across their chests. They moved quietly, boots sinking into wet sand, eyes scanning the tree line. The island was deceptively calm. Only the caw of birds and the buzz of insects broke the silence. Then at the ridge, they saw them. 3 Hagos side by side, positioned like sentinels. But these weren't moving. They'd been camouflaged with palm leaves, abandoned, or so it seemed. One Marine crept forward and tapped the hull with his rifle. The sound echoed hollow. Another climbed up, peering into the hatch. Empty. "Looks like they ditched them," he said. But McAdams frowned. "Or they're bait," he muttered. Moments later, a crack rang out, a sniper shot. A Marine dropped instantly. The others dove for cover, firing back. The jungle erupted. From the slope behind the tanks, Japanese infantry poured out, shouting, their rifles flashing. The Marines answered with a wall of lead. The Brownings thundered, chewing through foliage and men alike. The abandoned Hagos became shields, then tombs, as rounds ricocheted off their thin hulls. Miller swung his gun around, the barrel smoking. eyes locked on a group of enemy soldiers darting behind one of the tanks. He fired. The 50 cal slugs ripped through the Hago and the men behind it, sparks and screams blending into one awful sound. When it ended, the jungle fell eerily quiet again. The Marines advanced cautiously. McAdams kicked open one of the tank's hatches and muttered, "They used their own tanks for cover. That's how desperate they are." Miller stared at the holes in the armor, daylight shining through from side to side. He whispered, "If this is all they've got left, maybe this war's already decided." But deep down, none of them believed it. Every victory in the Pacific had come at a price, and every island seemed to fight harder than the last. The Marines had learned that no matter how weak Japan's machines looked, the men behind them refused to surrender. The Hago, for all its flaws, embodied that stubbornness. It wasn't the tank that made the Japanese dangerous. It was the will that drove it forward. That night, Miller wrote a few lines in his small, sweat-stained notebook. "We laughed when we saw their tank. We don't laugh anymore. They fight with ghosts inside those things." The next morning, as the sun bled through mist, the Marines saw something in the distance, faint tracks in the sand leading inland toward the heart of the jungle. Fresh ones. The enemy hadn't given up their Hagos after all. Somewhere ahead, engines were still rumbling, small but deadly, waiting for the next encounter, and as the patrol moved out again, the laughter of that first day felt a lifetime away. The morning mist hung thick over the island, dampening sound and obscuring shapes, turning every shadow into a possible enemy. The Marines moved forward cautiously, every step calculated, rifles and Brownings at the ready. Their eyes scanned for the slightest glint of metal or the unnatural movement of jungle leaves. The tracks from the previous day's Hagos led deeper into the dense forest, winding between coconut palms and fallen trees, creating a trail that promised danger. Each Marine felt the tension coil in his stomach, the kind of taut awareness that comes only after a lifetime of combat, where every rustle could be the first sign of death. Suddenly, a low clatter echoed ahead, the distinct chattering of light tank treads over uneven earth. The Marines hit the dirt instinctively, weapons snapping to firing positions. Through the haze, 3 Hago tanks emerged, staggering forward, their thin steel hulls barely visible in the gray light. Despite their size, the tanks exuded menace in the Marines' eyes. They had already seen what these machines could do when combined with human determination. Even a fragile tank, in the right hands, could destroy, intimidate, and shape a battlefield. Corporal Jackson raised his Browning M2, the heavy barrel gleaming with morning dew. The first burst tore through the nearest Hago, slicing a hole clean through its side. The tank's engine caught fire instantly, smoke and flame licking the hull, blackening the leaves above. The second Hago tried to maneuver, but the Marines anticipated every move, their coordinated fire ripping through treads and vision slits. One of the tanks toppled into a shallow ditch, flames spitting from its rear engine, the crew inside no longer a threat. The jungle filled with the smell of hot metal, burning fuel and gunpowder. The third Hago attempted a desperate flanking maneuver. The Marines had anticipated this. Sergeant McAdams barked orders, redirecting gunners to cut off its escape. The tank shuddered under multiple bursts, sparks flying from rivets, treads tearing over the soft sand. The gunner inside tried to fire the 37mm cannon, but the rounds bounced harmlessly, ricocheting off trees or being shredded mid-flight by the Marines' machine gun fire. Within moments, the Hago's engine died, smoke pouring from vents and hatches. Marines advanced cautiously, weapons ready in case the crew attempted to escape. Amid the chaos, Miller noticed movement at the tree line, Japanese infantry attempting to rescue the disabled tank crews. He motioned to his squad, coordinating fire to intercept them. Bullets tore through foliage, and the Marines' suppressive fire forced the enemy to scatter, leaving their comrades behind. Every movement, every shot demonstrated the lethal efficiency of a disciplined crew armed with Browning 50 cals. What had once been a laughable tank now lay destroyed. Yet the courage of its crew was undeniable. A stark reminder that even fragile machines, when manned by determined soldiers, could shape the battlefield. After the engagement, the Marines paused to assess the wreckage. The first Hago was a charred skeleton, treads twisted, turret melted. Holes punctured every angle, showing the sheer power of concentrated .50 caliber fire. The second tank lay half buried in mud, smoke still curling from the engine compartment. Miller ran a hand over the steel, feeling the heat radiate from the destroyed interior. "This is what war looks like," he muttered, voice low. The others nodded, understanding the truth in his words. The enemy's machines were weak, but the fight had been real, and the cost could have been theirs. By afternoon, orders came to advance further inland. Reconnaissance indicated additional Hago units in a nearby valley. The Marines moved methodically, using the terrain to their advantage. Fallen trees became natural cover, small ridges blocked line of sight from enemy positions, and foliage provided concealment for quick maneuvers. The squad spread out, each man watching and listening for signs of enemy activity. The jungle, silent yet full of hidden dangers, seemed almost alive, a maze where every step carried risk. They reached a clearing where the ground was littered with debris, discarded helmets, spent ammunition, and the remains of previous skirmishes. It was a silent testament to the relentlessness of the Pacific Campaign. The Marines advanced with caution, aware that the enemy had learned from previous encounters. Still, the Hagos, though frail, were persistent. Even destroyed, their presence shaped the Marines' movement, forcing vigilance, coordination, and constant attention to detail. As dusk approached, another small group of Hagos appeared, moving with almost mechanical determination. The Marines opened fire immediately, a chorus of gunfire tearing through the thinning light. Explosions, smoke, and fire created a chaotic tableau, yet through it all, the Marines maintained discipline, focusing on angles, weak points, and firing lines. Every burst from the Browning ripped through the Hago's thin armor, and each disabled tank reinforced a growing understanding. Even light armor could pose a real threat if underestimated, but coordinated firepower, courage, and tactical knowledge could turn the tide decisively. By nightfall, the Marines had neutralized all visible threats in the valley. The Hagos, once symbols of Japanese ingenuity, lay destroyed, a testament to both the lethality of modern weapons and the skill of the soldiers who wielded them. Miller and his squad paused, exhausted but alert, watching the smoke rise from each wreck. The island, scarred and silent, held the echoes of battle, the roar of 50 cals, the crack of small arms fire, and the hiss of burning metal. Each Marine knew that laughter would not return. The enemy had proven tenacious, and the next engagement could bring greater danger. In their temporary camp, Miller wrote another note in his journal. "They laughed when we laughed. We laughed when we destroyed the tank. Tomorrow, we'll see if the next one laughs too, or if it teaches us a lesson we won't forget." The night was quiet, but tense, as the Marines understood that each encounter was not simply a fight against machines, but a confrontation with human determination, ingenuity, and courage. The Hago, though fragile, had forced them to adapt, to think, and to fight with precision. This battle, though brief, would stay with them, a vivid lesson in how small, seemingly insignificant machines could demand respect, inspire caution, and define the rhythm of combat. The following morning, the Marines broke camp under a pall of low-hanging clouds, the wet jungle floor clinging to their boots and slowing every step. The air was thick, humid, and pungent with the smell of decay from days of battle. Every man knew that the Hagos they had destroyed were not the last. Japanese ingenuity had a stubborn persistence. If one tank was destroyed, another, hidden somewhere, would take its place. The Marines moved cautiously along a narrow path, each step a calculated decision between speed and stealth. Their weapons were ready, belts of ammunition draped over shoulders, fingers itching on triggers, eyes scanning the shifting shadows of the foliage. The forest seemed alive, whispering with the sounds of unseen wildlife and concealing potential threats. Every rustle could be a scout, every glint of metal a hidden Hago ready to strike. Ahead, a faint metallic chitter caught Miller's attention. He signaled for the squad to halt, crouching low behind the dense undergrowth. A single Hago emerged from a bend in the trail, its small engine rattling, the stubby barrel of its 37mm gun aimed in their direction. The Marines exchanged tense glances. No one spoke, each man calculating angles, distances, and trajectories in silence. Corporal Jackson raised his Browning M2, the heavy weight resting against his shoulder, and the squad held its collective breath. Then, with a synchronized motion learned from days of prior engagements, the Marines unleashed a torrent of .50 caliber fire. The first burst tore through the Hago's side, sparks and fragments spraying into the surrounding foliage. The crew inside panicked, the gunner trying to aim but trapped in the cabin, the driver struggling to maneuver the treads over the uneven ground. The second and third bursts struck the engine compartment, and black smoke immediately filled the narrow hull. Flames licked through the rivets and seams, consuming the metal in a small, fiery inferno. Miller could hear the faint whine of mechanical failure as the tank's movement faltered and finally ceased. He didn't laugh this time. The moment had no room for humor, only the sobering knowledge that this small, fragile tank had caused fear and forced every man to focus entirely on survival and precision. As the squad approached the destroyed Hago, they could see the damage firsthand, holes torn through steel barely a centimeter thick, scorch marks from bullets that passed through and ignited fuel lines, the twisted remains of the treads where shots had shredded the metal links. The Marines understood that they held incredible firepower in their hands, yet they also recognized the fragility of victory. Each successful engagement came with the reminder that one miscalculation, a delayed shot, a wrong angle, could have turned this from triumph to tragedy. Every destroyed tank was a victory earned through discipline, skill, and unflinching nerve under pressure. Suddenly, a new threat emerged from the underbrush, a second Hago, partially camouflaged with palm fronds and mud, attempting a flanking maneuver. The Marines reacted instantly, Browning barrels lifting to fire. This tank had been positioned as bait, and the enemy's coordination was apparent despite the machine's diminutive size. The first volley struck the side, puncturing the hull, and sparks flew as metal met metal. The tank attempted to retreat, but sustained fire from multiple angles cut off escape. Within moments, the Hago's engine ignited, and black smoke spiraled upward, a grim column marking the end of yet another threat. Corporal Jackson knelt beside the tank, inspecting a series of bullet holes that ran through the turret. "Can you believe this thing was supposed to be part of their main armored force?" he muttered. Sergeant McAdams shook his head, muttering under his breath about the audacity of the enemy. Despite the ease with which they had neutralized these tanks, the Marines understood the larger lesson. Even the smallest, seemingly weak machines could pose deadly risks if underestimated. Precision, coordination, and the courage to maintain composure under fire were the only shields against such dangers. The squad advanced cautiously, every step measured. They entered a small clearing where multiple Hagos had been spotted, some disabled by previous engagements, others hidden under makeshift camouflage. The Marines worked systematically, combining observation with calculated bursts of fire. Each Hago was evaluated before engagement, weak points targeted, angles calculated, and lines of retreat considered. The enemy's attempts to use the tanks as mobile cover were futile against disciplined machine gun fire. The clearing soon became a tableau of twisted metal, smoke, and scorched vegetation. By mid-afternoon, the squad paused to regroup. Exhaustion etched every face. Sweat and grime streaked with soot from the destroyed tanks. The jungle around them was silent, save for the occasional hiss of a cooling engine or the crack of a distant rifle. They had destroyed every Hago in the area, yet each Marine knew that their mission was far from over. Intelligence indicated more enemy positions inland, deeper into the jungle, where the Hagos continued to serve as both weapons and symbols of Japan's determination to resist. Miller crouched behind a fallen palm tree, adjusting his Browning. He reflected on the transformation of his perception. What had initially been a source of laughter now carried the weight of gravity. The Hago, small and seemingly absurd, had forced the Marines to adapt, to fight with relentless precision, and to respect the deadly potential of even the most fragile enemy machine. Laughter had given way to focus, humor to discipline, and underestimation to calculated respect. As night fell, the Marines established a temporary perimeter. Fires burned low, and the men cleaned and maintained their weapons while keeping one eye on the darkened jungle. The smoke from the destroyed Hagos still lingered in the air, twisting upward in thin columns that glimmered in the moonlight. Every Marine knew that tomorrow would bring another encounter, perhaps more dangerous, perhaps even deadlier, and that their skill, courage, and teamwork would once again be tested against the relentless ingenuity and bravery of the enemy. In his journal, Miller scribbled, "We laughed when we saw their tanks the first time. We fight them now with respect. Every machine, no matter how small, carries a story of courage, fear, and death, and every round we fire carries the same." As the wind whispered through the palm fronds, the Marines stared into the darkness, knowing that each destroyed Hago was not merely a victory, but a lesson, a stark reminder that survival depended on precision, teamwork, and the relentless pursuit of excellence in the chaos of war. The following morning, before dawn, the Marines stirred quietly, alert to the slightest movement. The air was thick and heavy with the scent of damp earth and burning metal from the Hagos they had destroyed days prior. Each man checked his weapon with methodical care, ensuring that every Browning M2 was loaded, belts aligned, and ready for the inevitable clash that awaited in the dense jungle. Miller adjusted the weight of his machine gun, feeling the familiar tension in his shoulders, the same tension that had carried him through every encounter. Around him, the squad moved with practiced efficiency, their steps soft against the moist undergrowth, each man silently acknowledging the stakes, that a single misstep or delayed reaction could turn a victory into a slaughter. As they advanced, the remnants of the battlefield revealed themselves. Charred fragments of Hago tanks littered the forest floor, their twisted steel hulls punctuated by countless bullet holes. Some still smoldered faintly, wisps of black smoke curling upward, mingling with the morning fog. Miller took a long breath, absorbing the surreal tableau, mangled metal, shattered vegetation, and the eerie silence that followed the chaos of combat. The smoke, the smell, the scorched earth, all bore testament to the destructive power of concentrated .50 caliber fire, and yet the enemy's resolve lingered like a shadow over the Marines' hard-won victories. They knew that more Hagos, more traps, more cunning strategies would appear as they pushed further inland. From the tree line ahead came faint movement. At first, it seemed like shadows flickering in the morning haze, but the trained eyes of the Marines detected the mechanical signatures they had learned to recognize. Hago tracks pressed into the mud, leading deeper into the jungle. Then, as if rising from the earth itself, a pair of tanks emerged, their small frames moving with surprising speed and coordination. The Marines held their positions, Browning barrels raised and ready, each heartbeat synchronized with the tension in the air. When the first burst of .50 caliber fire erupted, the jungle seemed to explode around them. Splinters of palm fronds flew as rounds tore through foliage and metal alike. The leading Hago shuddered violently as bullets tore through its thin hull. The engine screamed, metal groaning under the impact, and the tank lurched to a halt, smoke spewing from the seams. The second tank attempted a maneuver to flank the Marines, its treads churning mud and debris, but the gunners anticipated the move, firing in unison. Each slug tore through the engine and hull, creating new entry points for fire to penetrate, ensuring that the tank could not recover. Flames engulfed it almost immediately, black smoke spiraling into the canopy above. Amid the carnage, Japanese infantry attempted a counterattack, emerging from behind the remaining tanks and the dense undergrowth. The Marines reacted with lethal precision, their fire cutting down any who dared advance, forcing others to retreat under the combined weight of coordinated suppression and machine gun dominance. The Hagos, though destroyed or immobilized, had served their purpose, drawing attention and attempting to shield infantry. Yet ultimately, they could not withstand the focused firepower and tactical discipline of the Marines. Each tank fell as if on cue, reinforcing the grim lesson that even lightly armored vehicles could inflict chaos if underestimated. Yet skillful execution could neutralize threats swiftly and decisively. By midday, the valley where the battle had raged lay in smoldering ruin. Charred tanks, shredded foliage, and the detritus of war painted a scene both horrifying and awe-inspiring. The Marines paused, scanning the horizon for any remaining threats. Not a single Hago remained operational, yet the crew understood that enemy ingenuity would not be so easily defeated. The jungle, though quiet now, was a repository of danger. Each shadow could hide another tank, each rustle a soldier prepared to fight to the last. They moved carefully, every Marine aware that survival depended not just on firepower, but on vigilance, teamwork, and unwavering discipline under extreme stress. As the day waned, the squad reached a ridge overlooking the aftermath. The smoke from destroyed tanks mingled with the fog, forming ghostly pillars that rose into the sky. Miller surveyed the scene, noting the precision of their fire, the efficiency of their coordinated maneuvers, and the undeniable courage of the enemy who had manned such fragile machines. The Hago, for all its simplicity and small size, had forced them to adapt, to anticipate, and to execute flawlessly. The Marines had learned a crucial lesson. Even the most seemingly insignificant enemy assets required respect, analysis, and relentless execution to overcome. Night descended slowly, the jungle cloaked in shadows, punctuated only by the occasional glow from the fires that still smoldered across the battlefield. The Marines set up a defensive perimeter, cleaning weapons, checking ammunition, and maintaining readiness. The air was thick with anticipation, each man aware that the next encounter could arrive at any moment. Miller wrote once more in his journal, "We laughed when we first saw them. We fight now with awareness. Every Hago carries the will of a man inside it. We destroy the machine, but we respect the courage. Tomorrow, there will be more, and we must be ready." In the final hours of darkness, as the wind whispered through palm fronds and the jungle seemed to hold its breath, the Marines reflected on what they had faced. The Hago, small and laughable in appearance, had revealed the brutal truth of war. Courage, ingenuity, and resolve could give life to the weakest machine, and precision, coordination, and courage could defeat it. Each destroyed tank was a story of human will and mechanical failure intertwined, a lesson in warfare that would remain imprinted in the minds of every Marine present. And as dawn approached once more, the Marines prepared to move forward. The laughter of the first encounter had long since vanished, replaced by sober respect, disciplined vigilance, and an understanding that the Hago, though tiny, represented an enduring challenge in the relentless, unforgiving theater of war. In that realization lay the full weight of experience. The smallest adversary, if underestimated, could kill, maim, or delay. But a well-trained, focused crew armed with Browning .50 caliber firepower could turn the tide and impose their will decisively. The lesson of the Hago would echo in every patrol, every ambush, and every engagement that followed, a testament to the balance of courage, intellect, and firepower in combat. As the Marines advanced into the next stretch of jungle, Miller's gaze lingered on the remnants of the first Hagos, still smoldering under the rising sun. The machines were gone, but their story remained, a story of audacity, destruction, and the harsh realities of battle. He knew that every Marine present carried that story with them, embedded in memory and etched into the soul. And with that understanding, they moved forward into the unknown, prepared for whatever new machines, men, or strategies the enemy would throw at them, fully aware that their survival depended on skill, courage, and relentless determination.